Emily Foster sat on the edge of her worn-out couch, staring at the eviction notice on her coffee table. The bold, red letters at the top read, "Final Notice." She didn't need to read the rest, she already knew what it said. 2 weeks. That was all the time she had to pack up her belongings and figure out where to go next. Not that there was much to pack. Her studio apartment was sparsely furnished, her walls bare, and her kitchen cabinets almost empty. This wasn't the life she had envisioned when she'd left college 2 years ago. Rent or food, Emily muttered bitterly. That had been her monthly dilemma ever since her father's heart attack. The medical bills had been staggering, and while he'd survived, his ability to work had not. She'd taken on a part-time job at a local cafe while trying to make ends meet with her artwork. But who wanted to buy paintings from an unknown artist? Every rejection email she received felt like another nail in the coffin of her dreams. Her phone buzzed on the armrest, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her landlord, Mr. Cullen. "Emily, this is your final warning. Pay by the end of the month or you're out." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. Crying wouldn't solve anything. She needed a solution, and fast. Grabbing her laptop, she began scrolling through job listings. The cafe barely paid minimum wage, and she needed something drastic, something that could fix her situation overnight. As she clicked through endless ads for administrative assistants, sales reps, and delivery drivers, she found herself sinking deeper into despair. None of these jobs would pay enough to get her out of debt, let alone save her apartment. Then one ad caught her eye. Seeking personal companion. Generous compensation. Discretion required. The title made her pause. Clicking on the link, she read further. Looking for an individual to provide companionship and personal assistance. Must be adaptable, discreet, and available at all times. Compensation, $500,000 annually. Her mouth fell open. $500,000? That had to be a scam. But the ad was on a legitimate job board, and the contact email belonged to Grayson Industries, a name she recognized. Everyone knew about Alexander Grayson, the reclusive billionaire who owned half the city. He was the subject of constant rumors in tabloids, but no one seemed to know much about him personally. Her heart raced as she stared at the screen. This was ridiculous. There was no way she'd qualify for a job like that. She didn't have a fancy degree or a polished resume. But what did she have to lose? The worst they could do was ignore her application. Before she could second-guess herself, she attached her resume and typed a quick message. "Dear Sir/Madam, I am interested in the personal companion position. Please find my resume attached. I am available for an interview at your earliest convenience. Thank you for considering me." She hit send and immediately felt foolish. $500,000? She'd be lucky if they even bothered to reply. To her surprise, an email arrived just an hour later. "Miss Foster, thank you for your interest. Please come to Grayson Tower tomorrow at 9 a.m. for an interview. Bring identification." Her stomach flipped. It was real? It had to be, right? No scammer would have an office at Grayson Tower, the glittering skyscraper that dominated the downtown skyline. Still, a sliver of doubt gnawed at her. What if it was some kind of elaborate con? Or worse? Shaking her head, Emily pushed the thought away. She didn't have the luxury of being cautious. If there was even a small chance this job was legitimate, she had to take it. The next morning, Emily stood in front of Grayson Tower, craning her neck to take in its full height. The building gleamed in the morning sunlight, a testament to its owner's wealth and power. She felt woefully out of place in her thrift store blouse and scuffed flats, but there was no turning back now. Inside, the lobby was bustling with activity. People in sharp suits and designer dresses moved with purpose, barely sparing her a glance. Emily approached the sleek reception desk, where a woman with a tight bun and a colder expression greeted her. "I'm here for an interview," Emily said, her voice wavering slightly. "With Mr. Grayson." The receptionist's eyebrows twitched upward, but she said nothing. After typing something into her computer, she handed Emily a visitor's badge. "Take the elevator to the 40th floor." Emily nodded, clutching the badge tightly as she made her way to the elevator. The ride up felt interminable, her nerves building with each passing second. When the doors finally opened, she was greeted by a quiet, expansive office space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, and the air smelled faintly of leather and polished wood. "Miss Foster," a deep voice said. She turned to see a man standing near a massive desk. Alexander Grayson. He was even more intimidating in person than in the photos she'd seen online. His tailored suit hugged his tall, lean frame, and his silver-gray eyes were as piercing as they were cold. He exuded authority, the kind of man who was used to getting exactly what he wanted. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I'll be direct. This position requires absolute trust and loyalty. In exchange, I offer financial security beyond anything you've imagined." Emily swallowed hard. What exactly would I be doing?" Alexander leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Accompanying me to events. Running personal errands. Acting as my exclusive assistant when needed. And, most importantly, signing a contract that ensures your full commitment." She nodded slowly, though her mind was racing. "That sounds straightforward." He slid a thick document across the desk. "It is. This contract outlines the terms of our agreement. Once you sign, you'll receive an immediate advance of $500,000. Her breath caught. $500,000. The number seemed unreal. She glanced at the contract, but the tiny print and legal jargon blurred together. Her father's face flashed in her mind, tired, worried, and defeated. This money could change everything. "You're welcome to take your time," Alexander said, his tone unreadable. "But opportunities like this don't wait forever." Emily hesitated. Something about his calm demeanor made her uneasy, but her desperation overpowered her doubts. Grabbing the pen, she signed her name at the bottom of the contract. Alexander's lips curved into a faint smile. "Welcome to your new life, Miss Foster." That evening, Emily checked her bank account. Her jaw dropped. The balance read, $500,000. It was real. Relief washed over her, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Alexander. "Your life belongs to me now. Read the fine print." Emily's heart sank. Emily stared at the message, her stomach churning. "Your life belongs to me now. Read the fine print." She grabbed the thick stack of papers she'd carelessly shoved into her bag earlier. Her hands shook as she flipped through the contract, this time focusing on the words she had ignored. The legal language was dense, but a few clauses stood out immediately. "You will be available to Mr. Grayson at all times, for any purpose he deems necessary. You will not disclose the terms of this agreement to anyone. Termination of this agreement requires the written consent of both parties. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action, full repayment of all financial compensation, and additional penalties." Emily's heart raced as the weight of her decision came crashing down on her. She had effectively signed her freedom away. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her attention back to the screen. "A car will pick you up at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Be ready?" She wanted to scream. What had she done? This couldn't be real. But as she stared at her bank account balance, a staggering $500,000, she realized she couldn't afford to fight it. There was no way she could pay that money back. She was trapped. The following morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment at exactly 7 a.m. The driver, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, stepped out and opened the door without a word. Emily hesitated, clutching her bag tightly before sliding into the back seat. The interior smelled of leather and luxury, but it did little to calm her nerves. The ride to Alexander's estate was unnervingly quiet. Emily tried to make small talk, but the driver remained stoic, his eyes fixed on the road. As they pulled up to the mansion, her breath caught. The estate was like something out of a dream, or a nightmare. Glistening marble columns framed the front entrance, and manicured gardens stretched out in every direction. The sheer size of the property was overwhelming. The driver opened her door and she stepped out, feeling even smaller than she already had. A butler greeted her at the entrance, ushering her inside without a word. The interior was as grand as the exterior, crystal chandeliers, polished floors, and walls adorned with priceless art. It was beautiful, but there was a coldness to it, like the house itself was warning her to tread carefully. "Miss Foster." Alexander's voice echoed through the vast foyer. She turned to see him descending the grand staircase, looking just as intimidating as the day before. His gray eyes scanned her from head to toe, assessing her like she was an investment he was evaluating. "I trust you've read the contract by now," he said, his tone clipped. "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling. "But I didn't realize." "You didn't realize because you didn't read it," he interrupted. "That's your first lesson, Emily. Always read the fine print." She bit her lip, feeling both embarrassed and angry. "What exactly do you expect from me?" Alexander stepped closer, his presence towering. "For now, you'll accompany me to events, handle personal tasks, and follow my instructions without question. In return, you'll enjoy financial security most people can only dream of. Is that clear?" Emily nodded, though 1,000 questions swirled in her mind. "And if I refuse?" His expression darkened. "You won't. But if you try, you'll find the penalties outlined in the contract very real." His words sent a chill down her spine. Before she could respond, he handed her a garment bag. "We have a charity gala tonight. Be ready by 7 p.m. My staff will help you prepare." The next few hours passed in a blur. Alexander's staff whisked her into a luxurious guest suite, where a team of stylists transformed her. They chose a stunning black gown that clung to her curves and a delicate diamond necklace that sparkled under the lights. As Emily stared at her reflection in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. For a brief moment, she felt like she belonged in Alexander's world. But as she descended the staircase to meet him, her nerves returned in full force. He was waiting for her at the bottom, impeccably dressed in a tailored tuxedo. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, unreadable. "You clean up well," he said, offering his arm. The gala was held at an opulent ballroom downtown, filled with the city's elite. Emily quickly realized that this was more than a charity event, it was a showcase of power and wealth. Everyone wanted a moment of Alexander's time, but he kept her close, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. The whispers began almost immediately. "Who is she? Another one of his little projects? She won't last long." Emily tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. She felt like an outsider in every sense of the word. As the evening wore on, she became increasingly aware of the tension surrounding Alexander. People spoke to him with a mix of respect and fear, and there was a guardedness in his interactions that set her on edge. Then a woman approached them, a striking brunette in a shimmering red dress. Her smile was sharp, her eyes colder than ice. "Alexander," she said smoothly, "you're full of surprises. And who is this?" "This is Emily," Alexander said, his tone curt. "She's with me." The woman's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Emily, is it? I hope you know what you're getting into." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Be careful. Men like Alexander don't play fair." Before Emily could respond, Alexander stepped between them. "That's enough, Victoria," he said, his voice like steel. "Emily, come with me." As he led her away, Emily couldn't shake the woman's words. "What did she mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Don't concern yourself with her. She's irrelevant." But as they exited the ballroom and stepped into the cool night air, Emily felt anything but reassured. Something about Victoria's warning had struck a chord, and she couldn't ignore the feeling that she was in way over her head. As they approached the waiting car, a shadowy figure stepped out of the darkness. Alexander froze, his body tense. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. The figure stepped closer, and Emily's heart stopped as she heard the words. "Grayson, we need to talk. And this time you won't walk away unscathed." The figure in the shadow stepped closer, the glow of a nearby street lamp illuminating his face. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his cheek. There was a menacing energy about him, and Emily instinctively moved closer to Alexander. "Luca," Alexander said, his voice cold and controlled. "This isn't the time or place." "You don't get to decide that," Luca growled. His gaze shifted to Emily, narrowing. "Who's the girl? Another pawn in your game?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "She's none of your concern." "She should be." Luca smirked, but the expression was devoid of humor. "Does she even know what you've dragged her into?" "Enough," Alexander snapped, stepping forward. His presence was commanding, but Emily could feel the tension radiating off him. "We'll discuss this later." Luca's smirk disappeared, replaced by a glare. "You're running out of later, Grayson." Tick-tock. Before Emily could process what was happening, Alexander grabbed her hand and led her to the car. The driver opened the door, and Alexander practically pushed her inside. Moments later, they were speeding away from the ballroom. "What was that?" Emily demanded, her voice trembling. "Who was he?" Alexander stared out the window, his jaw clenched. "A problem I'll deal with?" "That's not an answer," she pressed. "Why did he act like I'm in danger?" Alexander turned to her, his gray eyes hard. "Because you might be. But I won't let anything happen to you." Emily's stomach twisted. "I didn't sign up for this," she whispered. "Yes, you did," he said sharply. "You just didn't read the contract." Back at the mansion, Alexander dismissed his staff and led Emily to his office. The room was as imposing as the rest of the house. Dark wood paneling, shelves lined with leather-bound books, and a massive desk that seemed to dominate the space. He closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit. "We need to talk," he said, his tone softer but no less serious. "There are things about me you don't know. Things you need to know if you're going to stay." Emily's pulse quickened. "Stay? What does that mean?" Alexander leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. "When you signed that contract, you became part of my world. And my world isn't simple. It's dangerous." Her breath hitched. "Dangerous how?" He hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "You've heard the rumors about me. That I'm ruthless in business, that I've made enemies." She nodded slowly. "Everyone knows that. What they don't know is the extent of it," he continued. "My success didn't come without cost. There are people who would do anything to see me fall, and they're not above using you to get to me." Emily's mind raced. "So what? I'm bait now?" "No," he said firmly. "You're under my protection. As long as you follow my instructions, you'll be safe." She stared at him, trying to process his words. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about survival. That night, unable to sleep, Emily decided to explore the mansion. The opulence of the place was overwhelming, but there was something cold and impersonal about it. As she wandered through the halls, she came across a door that was slightly ajar. Inside, she could see the faint glow of a computer screen. Curiosity got the better of her. She stepped inside and found herself in Alexander's private office. The desk was covered in papers, and the computer displayed a document with her name at the top. Her heart pounded as she moved closer. The document was a dossier on her. It contained everything: her financial records, her father's medical history, even details about her art portfolio. But what shocked her most was a section titled Potential Leverage. She backed away, her hands trembling. Why did Alexander have this? Was this why he'd chosen her? A voice broke through her panic. "I warned you not to cross boundaries." Emily spun around to see Alexander standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "You've been spying on me," she accused, her voice shaking with anger. "I've been protecting you," he corrected, his tone calm but firm. "That file is part of the precautions I take for everyone in my life. It's how I stay ahead." She shook her head. "This isn't protection. It's control." Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. For the first time he looked tired. "Emily, you don't understand the threats I face. That man you met tonight, Luca, he's just one of many. I needed to know everything about you to keep you safe." "But why me?" she demanded. "Out of all the people you could have chosen, why did you pick me?" Alexander hesitated, his gaze softening. "Because your father saved my life years ago. I owed him. And when I saw how much you were struggling, I thought I could help." Emily's anger faltered. She hadn't expected that answer. "My father never mentioned you." "He wouldn't have," Alexander said quietly. "It wasn't something he wanted you to know. But now, it's my responsibility to ensure his sacrifice wasn't in vain." Before Emily could respond, the door to the office burst open. One of Alexander's security guards stepped in, his face pale. "Sir, we have a breach. Someone's on the property." Alexander's expression hardened. He turned to Emily. "Stay here. Don't move." As Alexander left the room, Emily's eyes fell on a drawer slightly ajar. Inside was a small key, labeled Restricted Wing. Her curiosity burned brighter than her fear. Ignoring his warning, she grabbed the key and slipped out of the office, heading toward the locked doors she'd noticed earlier. When she inserted the key and turned it, the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. At the end of it, a door was ajar. Emily stepped closer, her heart pounding, and froze when she heard voices inside. "She's not safe here. You know what needs to be done." Emily stood frozen at the end of the hallway, her heart hammering in her chest. The voices coming from the room were muffled but clear enough to piece together fragments of a conversation. "She's a liability," a man's voice said sharply. "If they find out about her, it'll be more than just you they come after." "She's under my protection," Alexander's voice replied, low and commanding. "I'll handle it." "You're too close to this, Grayson. You always swore you wouldn't make it personal." Emily's stomach churned. She shouldn't be here. Whatever Alexander was discussing, it wasn't meant for her ears. But she couldn't stop herself from stepping closer. Just as she reached the door, her foot brushed against a loose floorboard, the creak breaking the silence. The voices stopped. The room fell deathly quiet. "Who's there?" Alexander barked. Emily panicked, backing away, but it was too late. The door flew open and Alexander's eyes locked onto her. He was flanked by two men she didn't recognize, both of them tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating danger. One of them reached for something at his waist, but Alexander raised a hand, stopping him. "Emily," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "I told you to stay in the office." I heard voices," she stammered, her back pressed against the wall. I don't know what I thought." Alexander's jaw tightened. He turned to the other men. "Leave us?" The men hesitated but eventually nodded, brushing past Emily as they exited. Once they were gone, Alexander grabbed her arm, not roughly but firmly, and pulled her into the room. He closed the door behind them, locking it. The room was sparse, almost clinical, with a large desk covered in maps and documents. A glowing monitor displayed a live feed of what looked like the mansion's grounds, where shadows moved among the trees. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Alexander hissed, his gray eyes blazing with anger. Emily yanked her arm free. "No, I don't, because you refuse to tell me anything. You say I'm in danger, but you won't tell me why. You say I'm under your protection, but you spy on me like I'm some kind of enemy. I deserve answers, Alexander." He exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing slightly. For a moment she thought he might actually tell her the truth. But when he spoke, his tone was colder than ever. "You're right. You do deserve answers. But you won't like them." Try me, she said, crossing her arms. Alexander gestured toward the monitor. That's what I'm protecting you from. Luca wasn't bluffing when he said you were a target. He works for a rival syndicate, a group that's been trying to dismantle my empire for years. They've used bribery, blackmail, even assassinations. When they couldn't touch me, they decided to target anyone close to me. Emily's throat tightened. But I'm not close to you. We barely know each other. That doesn't matter to them, Alexander said. All they see is an opportunity. By signing that contract, you became part of my world, whether you wanted to or not. She shook her head, disbelief coursing through her. So what? I'm just collateral damage in some billionaire war? No, he said, stepping closer. You're the leverage they think they can use against me. That's why I brought you here, why I'm keeping you under constant surveillance. It's not just about protecting you, it's about keeping you alive. The weight of his words hit her like a freight train. This wasn't just a job or a bad decision she could walk away from. She was trapped, caught in a web she hadn't even known existed. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. I know, Alexander said, his voice softer now. But it's the reality we're in. And the only way out is to trust me. A loud crash shattered the tension, followed by the sound of shouts and gunfire. Alexander moved instantly, pulling Emily behind the desk. He pressed a hidden button, and a panel on the wall slid open, revealing a passageway. Go, he ordered, his voice urgent. Follow this tunnel until you reach the exit. My men will find you. What about you? She asked, panic rising. I'll handle this, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Now go. Emily hesitated for only a moment before scrambling into the passageway. The narrow tunnel was dark and cold, the sound of her footsteps echoing as she ran. Her mind raced with everything Alexander had told her, but there was no time to process it. All she could do was keep moving. She reached the end of the tunnel and emerged in what looked like an old storage shed on the edge of the estate. Just as Alexander had said, two men in suits were waiting for her. One of them spoke into a headset. We have her. Proceeding to the extraction point. Extraction point? Emily asked, her voice shaking. Where are you taking me? To safety, the man replied curtly. Stay close. Before she could argue, a black SUV roared into view. The men ushered her inside and the car sped off. Emily clutched the seatbelt, her knuckles white. Through the window, she could see the estate shrinking in the distance, smoke rising from the grounds. What's happening back there? She demanded. Is Alexander? Mr. Grayson will handle it, one of the men said, his tone giving nothing away. Our job is to ensure your safety. Emily didn't believe him. She had seen the look in Alexander's eyes before he sent her away. He wasn't just fighting to protect his empire, he was fighting to protect her. And for reasons she couldn't explain, the thought of losing him sent a pang of fear through her chest. The SUV screeched to a halt. Emily looked out the window and froze. A group of masked men stood in the road, armed and blocking their path. One of them stepped forward, tapping on the hood of the car with the barrel of his gun.